Good evening and welcome to another one of our DC Who's events with a special shout out to our Virginia Club of New York for tonight's event. For those that are returning, welcome back. Once again, it's been great to see familiar faces and see some familiar names. And for those that are new to our events, welcome. I hope you enjoy. My name is Kim Edwards, and I am one of two co-chairs for the club here in Washington, DC. And so for tonight, we have a wonderful guest, Miss Alexis Jones. She is a skillful yet witty journalist who is passionate about health, fitness, relationships, and bringing her readers fun and socially relevant information through both digital and print media. So welcome, Alexis.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kim. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, we are thrilled to have you. And for those that are unfamiliar with you, I will just say that I love reading your work. And hopefully tonight they'll kind of get a glimpse of what it looks like, what it sounds like to be an editor, and just connecting your professional skills in writing with the ways you uplift your community and some of the initiatives you've done at work. So I'm just thrilled to have you here tonight. For some of those that maybe haven't read your work, or maybe they don't know that they've read your work, how would you describe your journey into this writing field and where you are today?
Yeah, so thank you again, just everybody for being here. I started out at UVA, and I came into UVA as a pre-med major. So I thought that I was going to be pre-med, and when I entered, I started majoring in biology. But I quickly realized that I wasn't as interested in the actual execution of medicine. And I realized that I was not good with blood or any sort of closeness to it. So I quickly switched out of that, and I actually switched my major to English and Media Studies, and I started writing for the Cavalier Daily. And at first I started covering arts and entertainment and a lot of movie reviews and culturally relevant topics and socially relevant topics to the Charlottesville community. And then I got an internship through the American Society of Magazine Editors my junior year at UVA. And that is what really exposed me to the world of magazine journalism that I honestly didn't even know existed in such a large capacity, or that someone could actually pay me a salary to be a magazine editor. I have been reading magazines since I was a kid, whether it was Jet, Ebony, Cosmo 17. And I just I never thought that I could get to that point. And so I got the internship with the American Society of Magazine Editors, where I was sent to New York and placed at a magazine. They had a host of different ones. I ended up at the Knot, which is a national wedding magazine. And that was a super interesting experience, one that I didn't know I was, going to be good at, but I ended up being thrown into it and interviewing brides and doing sort of social and diversity campaigns for what a diverse wedding looks like when I was there. And that was really cool. So I did that internship throughout the entire summer. And then I decided when I graduated from UVA that I really wanted to get my master's in journalism. So I got my master's from Syracuse's SI Newhouse School of Public Communications. And that's where I really got a lot of hands-on experience. And then after that, I was a fellow at Hearst Magazines for Red Book and Women's Day. And then I was freelancing for Marie Claire, Harper's Bazaar, Prevention, and a couple of other publications within Hearst, while I was also assisting the vice president of content and the director of content strategy. And I did that for a year. And then I got a job at Women's Health as their assistant editor. And I did that for another year and a half. And now I am where I currently am at Health Magazine as the senior editor. And my job here at Health is that I oversee several of the sections, body and mind, which is really about how your body is affected by your health, whether that's chronic conditions, whether that's stress, anxiety, what that looks like in the different aspects outside of your body that have physiological repercussions on your body. And then I also run and edit the life section. And so I edit like 2 pieces a month in that section as well, which is really about, like you were saying, relationships, fitness, sort of like a mixture of fun topics. And then I also edit the front of book share section, which is all about like trends, whether that's, everyone's into CBD lately, and we're always like exploring what that means. Or if you've heard of like lymphatic draining, we're going to explain it to you and tell you whether or not it's worth it. So that's the front of book section that really covers like the trend pieces and what's worth it and what's not.
That is amazing. That array of different types of writing. I think the exposure that you've had has been fantastic. And during what seems like a short period of time, I know you living through it might feel like it's been a long, broad career, but hearing how fairly early on in college and your internship, you've been able to somewhat propel yourself each step of the way, which is phenomenal to hear. And I think that journalists in general have such a unique opportunity to not only remain authentic to themselves, but really stay with the times. And as you mentioned, be able to either write or edit trendy topics that are here in our world today. So
Mm-hmm.
I think about the trends, right, either in the world or what you're seeing in print regarding, you said mental health, regarding physical health, relationships, fitness, of course, considering the magazine that you're working with currently. How do you shift your skills from writing or editing pieces that you did before into more of this, I would say, consumer health that you're working with now?
Yeah. I think writing and editing, they're completely different mindsets. And I have two different hats that I think I put on. When I'm writing, I'm really focused on who am I getting to answer my questions? What physicians, what doctors, why am I picking them for their selective skill set, right? So if I'm working on a piece, like I did one on post-traumatic growth, which is all about the growth stage that you can reach after traumatic events, whether that's loss of a loved one or the recent racial reckoning that we've had in the United States, right? And so when I'm thinking about a topic like that and I'm writing that, I'm thinking about who am I talking to, who's the best person to speak to this piece. And so a lot of my prep work involves doing research on who are the leading people in that industry that I think can best help our readers understand what trauma is, what post-traumatic growth is. When I'm editing, though, I put on a different hat, right? And I'm not so much, because I'm not in depth into the reporting, I'm reading someone else's work. And my job on that end is now to think about what's missing from this piece. Who haven't they spoken to? Whose voices aren't being told in this story? I received a piece the other day, and I can't go too much into detail, but it was talking about a chronic condition that drastically affected women of color, but they weren't mentioned in the piece. So I had to bring that up and say, well, why didn't we talk about any women of color in this piece? Or who did you consider interviewing for this? Those questions are really important to answer and to consider as an editor. And you have to put that hat on and say, whose story isn't being told in this piece. And you really have to be diligent about that, because I think the worst thing that you can do as an editor is not shine a light on the people who are being affected disproportionately by certain conditions, whether that's mental health, whether that's a fitness condition, whatever it may be. I think that that's so important to highlight right now, and I think that it's something that the industry is really trying to do better about.
Yeah, for sure. And I love what you just mentioned about highlighting certain voices. And I want to come back to that. So we're going to put a pin in that, because I really want to dig into some of the intentionality of the work that you do. You mentioned a little bit about the things that are going on in the world and in the news. And I do understand that, there's a difference between public health and reporting versus that consumer health. But during this current time, both in the world, physically, politically, specifically with COVID-19 and its influence, how do you balance some of those demands for deadlines while keeping up with the news and things that are quickly changing in the world?
Yeah, I mean, it can be hard, right? Like, I think that there's so much intersection now between, I honestly really can't separate it, right? Because health is political. And what I'm doing is sort of always crossing over. And whether I'm watching the news, I'm constantly thinking about, well, how can I put this in a story? Or are my readers being affected by this? Is this something that we should be covering? And so we're constantly having those conversations and thinking about, how we can serve our readers to, the best of our ability to what's relevant to them now, right? It's not going to help them if we're just doing and producing stories that we're interested in. It has to be stories that are relevant and are helpful and answering the questions they have right now in current and present day. So I don't think you cannot address those things. You just can't.
You're right. You're right. And that's why that question, I wanted to make sure I asked it, because I think that times have shifted somewhat when creating these pieces for magazines, right?
Mhm.
Where there might have been a little bit more of a divide before between what was going on in the world and what people wanted to read about.
Mhm.
Where now, like you said, you can't really ignore things. Things might change in the world that do need to be brought up, or maybe it shifts the spin or the voice that comes through in a piece. um
Yeah.
yeah.
And and to add to that, I think for quite some time, magazines in general have sort of strayed away from traditional women's lifestyle publications, have steered away from being political.
Mhm.
And they've steered away from topics like this because unfortunately, COVID-19 has become political, right? And whether we're talking about the fact that Black people are twice as more likely to die from it, whether we're talking about the fact that in a recent study, they're talking about who's getting the vaccines, and it turns out that 63% of white people are getting them and only 6% of Black people are getting them. That is inherently political. And so we no longer have a choice not to address those things and not to address those disparities. And I think that health journalism is more important now than ever.
Mhm. I definitely agree with you in that regard. And something that you mentioned earlier that I did want to come back to, so I will address that, is one, your writing in general. Being someone that really enjoys good writing and enjoys objective writing, your writing in particular reflects a lot of what I feel as a reader: intentionality in your language. It's reaffirming. There's definitely always positive imagery and a sense of authenticity, which I appreciate. And my question would be, in the world that we live in today, and particularly you, and the skin that you're in, the path that you walk, is even more prominent. And you alluded to an instance in particular where you were able to elevate a perspective and a voice that may not have been originally elevated in that piece. How do you feel that your identity impacts the pieces that you write and or edit?
Um, I don't mind. My identity is me. And I think that that's what makes me so passionate about what I do. One of the stories that I worked on, at Women's Health was about lupus and the disproportionate effect that it has on Black women. I was able to, talk from personal experience because my mother's had lupus my whole life. And then I was able to interview real women who have lupus, who work for the Lupus Foundation, as well as Maya Harris, Kamala Harris's sister, about her experience with lupus. And I think that my identity has helped me and has made me see health through a different lens, and also give people who look like me a voice to tell their health story, and highlight people who may have been overlooked, whose conditions may have been overlooked otherwise. So I don't mind that my identity is a part of what I do. I think that's what has made me successful.
And I thank you for that, because I think that that is something for anyone, right? To make sure that many voices are not only heard but read, in particular through print, and digital media, of course. Thinking about some of the things that you spoke to regarding different types of writing and ensuring that um, we are connected to what is real, what is representative of the people that are reading the pieces. I know that there are some things that you've done, not necessarily in your current role, but in previous roles, to really help organizations in general, and magazines to be a little bit more open, a little bit more clear about how they are representing themselves, and frankly, more of an anti-racist organization. Can you speak to some of the initiatives that you've been a part of?
Yeah. So when I was at Hearst Magazines and working for Women's Health, I actually ran our fellowship program. And so that is all for entry-level journalists who have just come out of college. And a lot of them are journalists of color who are really getting their start. I started out as a fellow. And so I really took, pride in making sure that those fellows who were majority people of color got a seat at the table and were able to meet editors at all the different magazines and sort of say, hey, I'm here. Because as a fellow, you don't really get that much face-to-face time, and you're just given the assignments that they need you to crank out. You don't really get much of a voice or anything. And so I organized luncheons with a lot of the editors and the fellows and sort of bridge that gap between, entry level, right, journalists of color and people who are at the top who really are able to hire you and see you and give you that opportunity that you may not have gotten otherwise. So that was a really great experience for me, having been a fellow and having seen the gaps that there were in that program and being able to change that. Another thing we did when I was there was we had an inclusivity checklist. I don't know if you guys have seen, but there were, after sort of the racial reckoning that occurred in this country with the murder of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and a host of other people this past summer, media organizations, many of them took a 15% pledge in terms of what brands that they would be promoting, that they would be linking to in articles. And I was part of that task force at Women's Health, and we created an inclusivity checklist that was about maybe 3 pages long. And in it, we had, who, what professional did we choose to interview for this article? Was it a BIPOC person? Who's the best person for this? Did we shout out any brands who were run by women of color? What about this article that we published in 2016? Can we look back and update this? So there was a checklist, and we sort of went through both old articles and articles that we had on our tracker for the next upcoming months, and sort of rethought about who we were interviewing, who wrote the piece, what products we were calling out. And that's super important. And I've taken that into my current role. Like I said, in our life section, I edit a lot of the pieces in the life section, and we usually do, a gear story every month. And the market editor comes to me and she presents me with a bunch of gear that, whether it's summer gear for outdoor fitness or gear for the beach, whatever it may be for that month. And there were no brands of color in the list that she gave me. And so I just brought it up and said, hey, I know that there are plenty of, people of color producing, sun gear. Maybe we should, consider that. Let's make sure that we have 15%. If we're saying that we're doing the 50% pledge, then that's what we should be doing. And so I think that it makes me really happy to be in a position where I can sort of make people aware that they are not upholding their ends of the bargain sometimes. And I know it may not be intentional, but and sometimes it does suck to be the person of color to bring that up if you are one of the few people of color on the team, but I'd rather be there and say it than have it not be done at all.
And that's a great point. I think that you make, is bringing it up to light and to the forefront are ways to have genuine inclusivity, right? Yeah. And I thank you for that as a person of color and just as a woman in general. I think working for Women's Health, or in this case now Health Magazine, that's super important. And so I think that work should definitely continue. My next question is a bit of a pivot, so to speak, to where we are when it comes to media, and specifically social media. In the times that we are in, social media is, I would say, right up there with a means of getting information, a means of communicating. So many entrepreneurs, are now creating their entire jobs, their platform on social media platforms. How do you think that you have used social media more so now in regards to identifying certain avenues to pursue or certain topics, or have you?
Yeah, I mean, I use social media all the time. I am a hashtag fiend. And I think that's where I found the most interesting stories. I know when we were in a meeting and we were talking about how we would cover, COVID-19 and pregnancy, I was searching hashtags on Instagram, on Twitter, trying to find pregnant healthcare workers who would be willing to talk about their experience and their decision to either get the vaccine while pregnant or to wait until after delivery. And I managed to find, 3 healthcare workers that were willing to speak to me about their experience. And so I published and wrote that story for the site, and it was really good and helpful. And I got a lot of messages from both, the women who were interviewed and also from readers who were saying, thank you for sharing this perspective. I really have been troubled with this decision, and I really hope to hear the thought process of different healthcare workers and whether they were going to wait until after or whether they were getting it during delivery and sort of what their experience has been with side effects, etc. So I think social media can be really helpful in terms of finding a good story. But I also think you have to know how to sift through it the right way, because you really do have to be careful of false information, and make sure that the sources that you're looking at really are trusted sources and you're looking at real physicians and real medical centers, and just being really careful and diligent about fact checking and making sure that the information that you're receiving and sharing is coming from trusted sources.
Yeah, and that's a good point, that the sharing piece too. Still within that vein of social media, how do you think that magazines in general have shifted in the way that they present the information? And in this case, I think about digital media, of course. What has changed over time?
Yeah, I think digital media has shifted to being more relatable. I think social media, the whole point of social media was always to be relatable, but I think that at least what we've seen when we publish a first person essay, that does a lot better than doing an explainer on what is eczema, right? So if we were going to do an explainer on what is eczema, that may get, I don't know, 12K views. But if we do a first person explainer on how eczema has, affected my condition and here's why, and it's from a real woman who's really talking about her symptoms and what this is, we know that that will perform better than the explainer. And I think it's because people want to be able to relate to the content. And sometimes you don't get that with an explainer. Sometimes people do really want those questions answered and they want a step by step on what eczema is, how to cure it, X, Y, and Z. But other times I think people are really just looking to feel seen and heard. And I think that a lot of times that's what comes through with a lot of the first person essays that we end up publishing.
Thank you for that. And I think it will continue to shift and evolve over time as we see things shifting. And I definitely want to pause here and open the doors, or open the floor, so to speak, to those that would like to ask any questions. Feel free to put them in the chat. I will get to as many as possible during our time. But while those questions are coming in, I would definitely like to know, are there any interesting pieces that you're working on now that you are, of course, allowed to share with us, that have sparked your interest or might just be a favorite of yours?
I'm constantly working on things. I can't say everything. I am working on a really interesting Olympics package. You guys know Tokyo 2021 is coming up, so that is going to be really cool. And talking to some of the athletes and about their journeys. So that'll be interesting. I edited a really cool package about the placebo effect, which, if you're interested in that and how that works, you'll see that in the May issue of the magazine. So I can't say much more to come, but I'm constantly thinking about new ideas. And if anybody has any great pitches, feel free to DM me and email me at any time. I'm always open to hearing ideas and hearing new stories. So.
Yeah, that was a great segue actually into my next question, which was, or is, how do stories go from the back to coming to the forefront, for you all, at the table deciding what makes the cut and what doesn't? Can you kind of just walk us through that process?
Yeah. So basically, our managing editor will set a date on all of our calendars, the editorial staff calendars, saying this one will have the lineup or pitch meeting. And all the editors are responsible for bringing several pitches to the meeting. I usually have a list of 7, 8 pitches that I think will work, either some that I've crafted, some that freelancers have sent to me, and I'm presenting for them. And so it's sort of a mixture of both. And then we'll go down the lineup, and it's myself, the features director, our deputy, and our editor in chief. And we go through and talk through all of the pitches, answer sort of any questions that our editor in chief might have. The pitches are typically a paragraph long. And in it, we like to address why now, why Health Magazine, and why do people care about this, are really our sort of main three questions that need to be answered. And also, we like to present sort of a structural idea of how the story will play out. So is this going to be a written through piece? Is this going to be a first person essay? Is it going to be investigative? Sort of what is your structural idea of what this story will look like in print? And that's at least how print goes. With digital, it's a little more informal. And there's like a live Slack channel where, the digital team is constantly throwing ideas out there and saying, hey, what about this? Should we cover J-Lo's something today? Or what about this? Should we cover the COVID vaccine, whatever update today? So it's lively and definitely more free flowing, but with print, it's very structured because we work, 3 to 4 months ahead of time. And so we really have to have a clear and concise idea of like, why now, like, why will this work 3 months from now? And why is it valuable now, and why is it going to be valuable then?
Yeah, that is so true. And I was going to ask, determining things and their value and whether it's still going to be, important to people in it sounds like 3 months is kind of like that time frame that you all are working with. Have you ever had experiences where you felt as though, oh, we missed the boat, so to speak, on a topic where maybe it didn't land in, the next issue, but then it comes out in the news or it comes out in, a competitor's work and you feel as though, oh, maybe we should have selected that one?
Yeah, I think that always happens. I think in some way you're gonna get snubbed, or you'll talk about an idea that it was, just an inkling or a thought at a pitch meeting, but you didn't really follow through on it. You're like, dang, I just saw, Self Magazine cover that exact thing. I wish we had done it. So it definitely happens more often than you think, and you sort of kick yourself in the butt for not following through and pushing for it. But then you do a better story, and it's fine.
I imagine that does happen. And then you kind of move on from it and learn and maybe fight a little bit harder the next time, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
you mentioned a term, so freelancers, and it really sparks a thought about earlier when you mentioned that you had switched careers, or excuse me, switched majors in undergrad, and then you went on to pursue this career. There's been some debate about the value of journalism school, journalism getting your master's. Can you speak to a little bit about what are the upsides and downsides to pursuing that full master's versus going another route?
Yeah, I think it really depends on what you see as the end goal for your career. I think that there are plenty of people who have gone straight from undergraduate school and gotten, several internships in the industry and then worked their way up from intern to editorial assistant to assistant editor to associate to senior to features to whatever, and just gone up the ladder hierarchically and sort of traditionally. But I think that if you come from a undergraduate institution that maybe doesn't have a journalism program, or you decided later that you wanted to be a journalist, or you really just want to get more hands-on experience, which was my reason for going to grad school, is that, I switched my major at the end of my freshman year, and I had only one internship under my belt, and I knew that the people who I was competing with had 3, 4 internships, and they had, really had more experience in the field than I did. And I knew that I wanted to get my master's degree to really get that hands-on experience. And so that's why I did it. And I really got thrown into it and introduced to, and that's also where I made a lot of contacts, right? So I didn't really have the contacts that I needed, or that were not necessarily needed, but that were helpful for me to get to where I am right now. I think journalism school really did help in getting those contacts. And also I want to be a professor one day, right? And I would love to be a professor of journalism. And so having a master's degree in my back pocket is really useful for that too.
Yeah, and specifically the credentials in general, right?
Mhm.
And it makes me wonder, are there any for lack of a better term, downsides or exclusionary aspects to having particular credentials?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, obviously I can't say this because I'm not on the hiring side of things, but I'm sure that there are instances when, more qualified people of color haven't gotten roles because, the person next to them has a master's and they didn't, right? And I think we've seen that before time and time again. And so that was also another reason, like I didn't want to have anyone look at my resume and say she's not as qualified because she doesn't have a master's degree. And I've always been taught and been raised to work 10 times harder. And so I wanted to have that in my back pocket as also a sense of security and saying, hey, look, I have a master's degree. And also, you need to pay me as much as my, colleagues who aren't people of color because I have this degree and I know what I'm worth.
Exactly, exactly. And speaking of knowing your worth, do you feel that your experience at UVA impacted your career, particularly as a Black woman?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that working for the Cab Daily was honestly one of the best experiences. It was such like a tight knit group of people, and I really loved it, and they really gave me a lot of leeway to sort of figure out what I loved about writing and really sort of exploring different communities, and really gave me a chance to see like what is it about journalism that gets me excited. I also think that we didn't have a journalism major at UVA, but we did have professors who had worked in journalism. I got to take a class with Wyatt Andrews, who was an amazing reporter for CBS for years. And he really just sort of threw us into the broadcasting world and made us go out there and do man on the street interviews and run up to people and get the story. And we were on tight deadlines as if we were working for him. He would assign us a story like for class at 5 o'clock, and we'd get an email and then it would be due the next day at 1 p.m. So we were like in the lab turning around stories, cranking out articles, as if we were on a news staff 24/7. And so I did really get that experience, and it really taught me how to work under pressure, honestly. The first day of class I remember he had a meme on the screen, and it was this little baby like drowning in a pool. And he was like, either you'll sink or you'll swim. That's how this class works. And all of us were sort of taken aback, but we realized that he was right. That's what sort of made us realize whether or not journalism was for us, and if we could sort of make it in this field, especially for those of the people in the class who wanted to be broadcast journalists, which really is go 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 and requires you to know a lot of multimedia skills that I certainly now have but don't use as a magazine journalist. But for those who did want to be in broadcasting, that really sort of weeded out the people who decided, you know what, I don't think this is for me. I don't want to do this. So I think that experience was really helpful for me, and also figuring out what path of journalism that I wanted to go down. So I realized, I don't think I want to be in broadcasting, but I think I definitely do want to write stories still. And I think magazines is sort of more the route I want to go in.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like it was a great introduction to what is journalism in all facets. And like you said, kind of weeding out if you really want to do this, what it takes. And for those that don't, go ahead and make that decision now,
Mm-hmm.
and like you said, in your case, you might have the skills that you may not use in this one instance or this one time period in your life, but it also gives you that extra kind of like boost, so to speak, or that knowledge that you could switch if you wanted to, and that's
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
uh,
absolutely.
yeah, yeah. And I wanted to ask a question, going back a little bit to some of the initiative work that we spoke about and the
Mm-hmm.
diversity, or in this case, lack of in certain aspects of working in your field. Do you or your organization have any data on the diversity of the readership? Um, and if not, how do you all kind of identify strategies for increasing your reach?
Yeah. We and our data, a lot of our data is public. You can go online and Google Health Magazine Media Kit, and you can see, our reader is, typically our median age is 45, her household income is $98,000, X, Y, and Z. I don't think that we have the diverse. I don't think we have like broken down by race yet. And that's something that I think that we definitely need to work on. At least that's not given to us. That information is not given to us. Granted, I just got there a month ago, so maybe it is somewhere, and I would love to. I would love to see it. But we do know like the age range of our reader, and we assume that our reader is diverse, and we assume that and even if our reader is not diverse, we want to cater to a diverse readership so that everyone of all backgrounds will want to read the magazine. So whether our readership is currently diverse or whether we want it to be diverse, we're still going to cover topics that reach a wide range of people. That's definitely at the helm of what we do and the topics that we cover. So I may not have the data on it, but me personally, and I think that the colleagues that I do work with are very adamant about making sure that the content that we're covering and the questions that we're answering for our readers are for everyone, and are really catering to people who from all different backgrounds, whether that's race or sexual identity or whatever it may be.
Right, right, exactly. And it sounds like that strategy for sure is one of the ways that you all are making an effort for sure to reach certain demographics that maybe you don't know for sure, but you want to at least reach out to, and then in turn be able to get that reciprocated feedback that this is what you all want to see, want to read. You do feel reflected in the work. Um,
Right. And then we also know by analytics, right? So we
right.
monitor our stories by Google Analytics, and we know what clicks and what doesn't. And it's really amazing to see a story that you've written and one that caters to, people who look like you. And I've done it before, and I see, oh my gosh, it got 37,000 views in 2 hours. And that feels good because I know that people who look like me are seeing the content, they're appreciating the content. And even if it's not people who look like me, but people who need to hear about these topics that affect people who don't look like them, that's also equally as important. And so that's really nice to see, to be able to see the live real-time numbers of how your story is growing and reaching certain audiences.
Mhm. And along that same line, thinking about reaching those individuals, you spoke a little bit about the people, right? The people, the writers and the editors that are editing the work. How do you make sure that you find diverse sources and writers for a lot of these stories?
Yeah, again, I'm always on social media. I
Okay.
think that's a great place to find people. It's where I've been able to find, Black RDs and dietitians that maybe aren't on, your typical list. Like I just had a call today, and it was a health forum and one of the dietitians was saying there are only 350 registered dietitians of color in New York, and two of the women were on that call. And so it can be really hard to find your sources, but social media can make it really easy because you can just type in RD, or sometimes Black RD, or sometimes, insert identity here, MD. And it's really easy to find the people who you want to speak to the specific story to make sure that it's as authentic as possible. And then with freelancers, it's the same thing. Honestly, I've posted on social media before to DM me if you have a story, but I'm also constantly looking on Instagram and looking for people who I think would be a great fit, and also getting pitches constantly from people too who want to write for the publication. And I keep an eye on people who are in marginalized groups because I think we constantly need more of that.
And that's great. That's great. The multiple ways and like layering on, it sounds like that you're doing to ensure that it's not just what comes to you naturally, but you are seeking multiple identities to be reflected and
Mhm.
increasing that. And
Yeah, and I think, and you and I talked about this before too. I think it's super important because I personally have not had an editor of color in my journey here since being in journalism. I've only had one, and she was a fitness director at Women's Health. But outside of that, I've never had a person of color edit my work. And I mean, that's not to say that people who aren't, people of color, that they can't do a proficient job. But I think it says something about the industry and where we need to go, and and how far we still have to go. And I think that some people, and you being in the education field, some people, you can understand never having a teacher of color, right? It's sort of the same thing, and people in media feel the same way. And as a young journalist, I looked up to people, you know, who were in media who looked like me, whether that was, Vanessa, who was the editor in chief of Essence for a while. And seeing those people in those high positions really was encouraging. And so that I hope that I can, sort of be that for other people. And like I said, they'll see the representation and know that they can also get to this position.
Yeah. And I'm glad you actually said that. I am going to call you out so you don't know the question I'm about to ask. But do you have a mentor? And you mentioned several times that you'd be more than willing to help others. Are you mentoring anyone or would you be willing to?
I'm always willing to mentor people. And my mentor has been the same since I was in the ASME program. I met a really great mentor there, and we've been, really close and tight ever since. And she's really guided me through this journey, and she's pushed me to like ask for more money because you're worth it. And she's been able to give me inside, scoops and say, actually, I know that that last person who was in that job got paid this amount. And so you should probably think about asking for, this. And also my family are my mentors. My mom, my godmother, my aunt, everybody who has taught me to be brilliant and smart and just advocate for myself. I think that they've been amazing. So I really appreciate their guidance because they are the ones who are on the phone listening to me, freaking out about the interviews and edit tests and whatever else is coming my way. So I really appreciate all of that.
And I'm sure some of them are on this tonight, and those that aren't, they know that you are appreciative. That is one thing that I have definitely gotten, both professionally and personally, reading your work and just getting to know you. It is tried and true. So I'm sure those that are helping you along the way are just, pouring into you so that you can continue that work for the next person coming up and coming behind you. Um, so I definitely want to be cognizant of the time. So there are a couple of questions that are just fun that I think people like to know, they want to ask. What is your favorite type of writing, whether it be a topic or the form? Tell us.
I love fiction writing. I'm a huge book nerd. If I could show you my bookcase, it's color coded right now. And I like recolor code it every week because I end up buying a new book that like messes up the aesthetic. So I love fiction books. I just finished Such a Fun Age. If you haven't read it, read it. Where the crawdads sing is so good. That one made me cry. I'm like constantly looking for new reads, but they have to be fiction. I'm obsessed. I think they just really do a great job of like transporting you to a different world. And it's honestly, it's a sense of escape because I'm constantly reading news all day. And so it feels nice to sort of get out of that and sort of be immersed in a fictional world for a little bit.
That's great. And it's always surprising because I think about, people are in certain fields and you think that you know who they are based on either what they do or the way they conduct themselves. And so it's always a fun question to find out, if no one's watching, what would you pick up? Are there any famous journalists that either inspired you or continue to inspire you and why?
Ah, yeah, I mean, honestly, I feel like there are many. I'm Candace Frederick. She does entertainment journalism at Harper's Bazaar, and I really enjoy her pieces. She's, I mean, just for the fun of it, she's a really good critic. And so if you want to read some good movie reviews and you're just looking for a little bit of an escape after have watched a really good movie and you want to hear what she's got to say, she's really good. Um, Robin Gavon, she's a writer for the Washington Post. And she writes a lot about fashion and politics. And so she's a great columnist. And if you want to read her work, that's amazing too. I feel like there are so many. The list could go on, but those are just two of my favorites whose reading I really really enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm literally taking notes on that just so I can follow up. um, Knowing that you, for the most part, are editing at this point in your career, is there a particular piece that you've written previously that you are especially proud of? Or if you were able to bring it back and, reprint, you would? What would that piece be?
Yeah, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but definitely the lupus piece that I wrote. That one was just really personal to me. The experiences in it, weaving in my personal experience with my mom, getting to interview real people. And at the time, it was really relevant because when Trump was president, he was recommending hydroxychloroquine as a treatment for COVID-19. And a lot of lupus patients who use that drug as a treatment weren't able to get access to it. including a lot of the women that I was interviewing for the story. And so that's really what that piece was about. And that also led to 3 other spin-off pieces on the site. One was a personal essay from Maya Harris that I edited. Another one was about a woman who, like I said, couldn't get her hydroxychloroquine after, this influx of people trying to get it who were fearful or who had COVID-19 and wanted it as a treatment. And it was just a really great piece to be a part of and be able to bring to light the sort of disparities and real world effects that that COVID and that lupus was having on so many people, because it really does disproportionately affect a lot of Black women in the US and outside of it. So it was a great piece to be a part of, and I would write it again and again. It was, yeah.
That's good. And I can definitely feel your energy as to why. Um, 2 more questions and I promise I will let you go. They're just coming.
Okay.
Do you choose stories or topics based on where the person might live, or print versus digital topics? Is there a separation? If it's going to be digital, then maybe you stick with these topics, print those topics.
Not so much topics as the kind of writing.
Okay.
I think that the topics, I think that they're valuable on either print or digital, but I will switch the way that the story is written, because I think that, and we know this from data and from what our readers perceive better, that in print, right, like they want longer form pieces, they're going to be open to reading it. And digital, we got to cut the word count. Like it has to be cut by maybe sometimes 400 words, and that can be a dagger to the heart. But sometimes they don't want to read the long form. And so sometimes you have to cut it, but then other times a story may be actually better longer on digital. And so, if we do have the room and we think that it's a piece that's worth doing a long form, like a personal essay, like the one that I edited for Maya Harris, and we were like, okay, let's give the space for this because it's a really personal story and she's talking about this and we think people will want to read it, then we'll give it the space it deserves. But if it was, say, I don't know, if we did an explainer in print about foot acne, right? Okay, which people do want to know about. Okay, so we did one in print on foot acne, and that was 2 pages. On digital, we're just gonna cut it short, and we're gonna answer like, what is foot acne, who gets it, how to treat it, etc. Whereas if it was, in print, maybe we'd have an intro with, a first person experience about foot acne and how this person figured out they had it, and then go into treating it, and then go into, what it is, etc. So I think the formatting of the story changes, but I think that the topics can be universal.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. Last question. Knowing what you know now, and by no means are you even halfway through your career. So let me go ahead and say that. I heard you loud and clear about where you want to go, and some of the things that you want to do along the way. But with the information you have today, is there anything that you would do differently now that you know more, you've lived more, you've seen more?
Hmm. I don't think I have any regrets. I think that I have fortunately, I think that even the career path that I went from pre-med to English and the path that I went in, I think that it's helped me sort of and helped me really figure out what I want to do and what I didn't want to do. And I think sometimes you really do need that. I think figuring out what you don't want to do, like a lot of people have said, is just as important as figuring out what you do want. And so that has been really helpful. And I guess the only thing that I would do differently is not be as shy sometimes. I think that early on in your career, you think that people don't want to help you, or they're too busy to help you. But I think something that my mentors always encouraged me to do is just reach out and ask people to, to coffee, to virtual coffee now, right? Or whatever it is. Ask someone if you can just have a 15-minute conversation about their career if you're interested in it. People really do like to talk about their experiences, and they're not as busy as we think. And a lot of people are willing to help you out if you're just asking for it. And I've learned to shoot cold emails to people I've never met before. And I wish I had done that earlier, because I think it would have, it would have just helped me be bolder and less shy, which is really helpful in journalism in general. So I think that, yeah, I think that's the best piece of advice is just if you see someone that you think is interesting on Media Social, or they're writing something that you really think is a great piece of work, reach out and say, hey, I really like this piece. I'm interested in journalism or whatever it may be.
And that is fantastic. And that leads into my closing, which I was going to say thank you, of course, for all of your valuable information. It was fun. Your authenticity, always love that. And thank you for shedding some light on some of the processes that take place kind of behind the scenes or on the other side of the table, so to speak. From
Yeah.
a writing perspective. And if you don't mind, I definitely think I will open it up for any last burning questions from those that are watching. And also, it sounds like we might have some people that would love to reach out to either pitch an idea or a topic. So, is there a best way to contact you?
Yes,
Do that?
you can reach me at Alexis, Alexis .Jones at Meredith, MEREDITH.com. I feel like I should type this out.
Yes, that would be super helpful.
I'm just gonna put it in here in the chat.
Great. That's awesome. Well, thank you again. I for sure really enjoyed it, and hopefully others got some new information. And definitely would love to see you again. We'd love to be on this journey with you. So thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for coming.